Hi, welcome to Moments with Marilyn. I'm your host, Marilyn Boyer, the mom of 14 homeschool kids. I love young moms, and it's my passion and my privilege to share tips and tools to make your journey easier. This week, we're going to continue our topic from last week, and we're going to deal with some misconceptions about homeschooling that I hope will help to set you free in your homeschooling journey. Okay, number 6. You need to know your child's learning style to teach them effectively. Let me just tell you, I never heard of it in the early days, and I taught all 14 of my kids without knowing their learning styles. I still don't really know their learning styles. It would be kind of overwhelming for me to stop and think of each one. But I've adapted how I teach them to the different types of learners. So I think I kind of did that in a roundabout way. Like, I had one that had a very logical mind, and reading was very hard for him. The English language was a struggle with all the rules and the exceptions. So he was very behind other kids in reading. So I had to come across a different way to teach him. He was probably 12 before he learned to read. But I never told him he was behind. I just told him that he was gifted. He had this super logical mind. He was gifted in math. He would find 5 different ways to do one math problem. So he was gifted in that way, and his younger sister was gifted in reading. So I would just tell him, Kelly's gifted in this, but you're gifted in this. And when he got it, he finally got it. So don't make your kids feel like they're behind just because they're not where the books say they're supposed to be. The time frame in which he learned to read was right for him. And the summer that he learned to read, 2 Treatises of Government by John Locke, which, if you are familiar with that book, it is not an easy read. So when he got it, it clicked and he got it. So if you're using a curriculum that just doesn't work for one of your kids, scratch it and find something that's more suited for them. Even if you just paid for the curriculum and it's the beginning of the year, but you're about to pull your hair out and your kids are too because it's just not working, scratch it and look for something else. One of my daughters struggled with her multiplication facts, and we switched to Math-U-See, and that worked great for her. So feel the freedom to switch around and find something that works for this individual child. Kids think differently. Their brains function differently. And what works for a lot of kids might not work for your child. One of my daughters, I let her finish high school a year early. And then while we were doing our 3 hours a day with academics, she read a plethora of books. She read biography, historical, providential history, current events, issues, apologetics, small amounts of historical fiction, economics, the Federalist Papers. She did Mike Ferris's constitutional law course, and she received a wonderful education just by reading 3 hours a day. When you think about it, when else in your entire life will you have 3 hours where you can read every day? And it was far better than sticking with what the government plan for that last year of high school would have been. But you get to choose. I'm not saying do that with your kids, but I'm saying you get to choose what your child needs. You can take into regard his giftings, his interests, his passions, and his needs. You set the goals, and you teach them to be self-directed learners as well. Talk to them about how they learn best, what's beneficial and what's not beneficial to them. One of my sons told me the way spelling books are set up did not help him at all. It did not help him spell. So I asked him, what does help you? And he said, well, if you will give me words of things that I'm interested in. At the time, he was interested in hunting white-tailed deer. So I took one of his books about hunting white-tailed deer, and I just gave him words, and he figured out how to spell them. That worked for him. So get your kids' input. They know what works and what doesn't work. And also remember that your kids can learn anything at any time in life that they need to. If you don't give them some course and later they go to college and they need this course, they can do it at that time when they see a need for it. One of my sons took a math course, a 2-week intensive at the community college before he went to get his law and communications degree. But at that time, he knew that he needed it to pass the requirement, so he put his mind to it and he did it. Mainly, you want to teach your kids how to learn. So anytime in their life they need to know information, they can learn it. Life is a lifelong school, if you will. And you just want to teach your kids to learn, but not burn them out so that they hate learning. And then they can learn it anytime in life they need to. So for me, it was overwhelming to try to think what my kids' learning style would have been. So if it overwhelms you, put it on the back burner. If it helps you, great, go for it. So I'm not telling you these things are bad. I'm just telling you think and don't feel like you've got to fit into somebody else's mold. If it boggles your brain and it confuses you and you can't handle it, forget it. Put it on the back burner. If it helps you and it helps you figure out your kids, then great, go for it. Number 7, sometimes we think I need to involve my kids in many activities and give them multiple opportunities to build a well-rounded child. Instead, let me tell you, you need to be home to effectively home educate. There are so many good activities to choose from. But remember, too many good things can become bad if it distracts from the best use of your child's time. To be committed to an activity requires a time commitment, practice, and we communicate to our child this must be really important. So we need to constantly evaluate to see if it's distracting me from my priorities. If it's a God-gifted pursuit, if it's God-gifted ability in your kids, you might want to take the time to pursue that. But you don't want to just fill your kids' lives with a bunch of busyness. Focus on the child and see what would be best for them. If you see that God has really gifted your child in violin, then take the time to give them violin lessons. But don't just try to fill your kids' lives with so many things. There's so many distractions out there, and we can become so busy we never have time to enjoy living. Instead, we want to focus also on our kids to serve others, and we don't want to have so many activities building them up and making them into super people that they can't focus on others. Number 8, sometimes we're tempted to think my child would be better off with a seasoned teacher, hence I'm going to do video school. Really the parent-child relationship is the most important thing. There's another podcast when I talk about cutting out the busy work. So we would do our academics in 2.5 or 3 hours a day. There's so much wasted time in a normal school. And if you do video school, you can't cut that out. You've got to do it the whole 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever it is. So I can see where video school would be really helpful for something like a foreign language. So if you are doing that and you don't know how to speak the language and you want to use a video school, great. But don't feel like you need to just sit your kids in front of this video for 8 hours a day to learn school. God has equipped you to be the perfect parent for your child. You can borrow brains, you can borrow a tutor, you can learn something online, but don't sacrifice your time with your child. I have sweet memories of sitting on the couch with my arm around a child, teaching them to read or reading their science to them or whatever. Those are such sweet times. You don't want to miss out on them. Number 9, we think, I've got to finish every book. We have to follow a prescribed curriculum. And you can't let your kids jump ahead if they're interested in what they're reading in. You can't stay at one chapter longer than you're supposed to because it's time to move on. That's what the curriculum says. Just because it's in the books, it might not be the best thing or the best way to teach your kids. I let each one of my kids progress at their own rate in every subject. Really, there is no place that they're supposed to be at any given time. They might be 2 grades ahead in history because they love it, they're passionate about it. They might be a year behind some other kids in math, but that's okay. You need to let your kids go at a rate where they're challenged but not overwhelmed. That's the key. And each child is different, I can tell you that. For instance, I had a daughter who loved to write. She did it for fun. I would see her sprawled out at any time of the day writing stories. Many of my boys, on the other hand, labored over writing. It was only when they had an issue they were passionate about that they would voluntarily sit down and write a letter to the editor or something like that. However, they might devour history books or biographies. Each one is different, and God's created them in a way that's right for them. So it's okay. When my oldest son was in first grade, he read the fourth grade history book through 8 times and he ate it up. He loved it. If you're not on target with your curriculum, you're not falling behind. Each child learns differently, so customize it to what's right for them. Girls can learn to cook as part of their math. They can double the recipe or triple the recipe, or they can design a project for baking for shut-ins. They can figure out amounts. They can shop the best unit prices. That's math. If your girls are struggling over math, let them do some fun math like that, and they'll see a need for math and why it's important. Or if they hate handwriting, let them do recipe cards. Let them write down grandma's special recipes, and they'll want it to look neat. Give them a reason for writing. Okay, reason number 10, academics are the goal of homeschooling. It's most important to transfer this information. I think sometimes as a parent, we're tempted to teach to have the approval of our peers, approval of men, instead of preparing our kids for the life purpose God designed them for. They need to learn to be useful to God. Our main goal should not be for them to have a cushy job or big pay or more toys. Each one of your kids is as important to God as David or Ruth or Esther or Daniel in Scripture. And God has a plan for their life, just like He did for them. So we are here on earth to be useful, productive servants of the Most High God foremost, not to get a good job or just to be good people. It's not really about what you know. It's really about who you are. 1 Corinthians 8:1 says, knowledge puffeth up. We don't want our kids to be academically superior, but not to have the character to go with it. Our real goal is to build sons and daughters who are mighty in spirit and who learn to make wise decisions, who learn to deal with what's going on in their heart and learn to reach out to others. So I would think if I just stick with teaching them what's in the prescribed curriculum, I can't go wrong. But I learned that character and Scripture are the most important. Character is just the attributes of God, and we need to teach it to our kids. I will give a link in the show notes of a list of character qualities, 45 character qualities to teach your kids with simple kid definitions and scriptures to go with it. Scripture and character are the most important things to teach your kids. 11. If extenuating circumstances come into my life, I should just put my kids back in school. And let me tell you from experience, God designs our curriculum for us. Sometimes illness comes into our life or death. God is designing our life curriculum. When I figured out I'd been pregnant 11 years and I would have morning sickness the first 3 months. So my kids would fix me breakfast in the morning sometimes or learn to help with the younger kids. So the kids are learning to serve mom if mom's sick with morning sickness. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a curriculum God's designed. When my dad got ill and I had to travel back and forth to Massachusetts to help take care of him, school was kind of on the back burner. I would assign my kids things to read, but to be there to help with math or whatever, I'd be gone for different periods of time. But we caught up. The next year, we caught things up. God designed that curriculum. We needed to be there to help my dad. And we are hopeful that he got saved there in his last few days. When my son Josh was sick with leukemia, and I've done a whole podcast on that if you want to hear about it, but it was just a time where school was on the back burner. We did not do school that year. We could not do school that year. We were so intensively taking Josh up to the hospital and dealing with chemo and radiation and all that stuff. So I would give my kids things to read. They could read their history. They could read in their science books. They could read in their lit books. But as far as me being there to teach them math concepts and stuff, it didn't happen. But it was a curriculum that God had for all of us. And I think our whole family are better people because of going through that experience and realizing that our time on earth is limited. And the time we spent with Josh was so much more important than being on curriculum, on pace to learn division or whatever. that just wasn't as important as what we learned during that 7 months. 12, the best way to learn history, for instance, is from a textbook. And we learned that it's not. We spent 2 years on the War of Independence when I was doing my research for You They Signed about the signers of the Declaration. My kids learned so much. You know, if you do a regular history book, and you should at some point in your homeschooling experience use a regular history book with your kids, but you've got maybe one chapter on the American Revolution, one chapter on World War II. You can't begin to understand the people and their sacrifices and everything that happened during that time. So we just spent 2 years on the War of Independence. We spent 3 years on the World War II. At the same time, we were reading in another history book too. But we interviewed veterans. We learned about their experiences. If they were in the Battle of the Bulge, we read a book about that, and then we could ask them semi-intelligent questions about their experiences. And we learned so much more from real people who lived it than we did just reading a normal history book. So as I'm saying, think outside the box, get creative. And I could go on and tell you so many stories about what we learned. We actually interviewed USS Indianapolis survivors who were 3 days on shark-infested waters before they were rescued. We talked to men who were roped to the wings of the plane when they were rescued, waiting for help to come. We talked to a Bataan Death March survivor. We talked to a World War II ace who flew his plane under the Eiffel Tower and shot down a German Messerschmitt. We visited him multiple times. He lived about an hour away from us. We met him at the D-Day Memorial. He's the one that inspired my daughter Casey to become a pilot. We learned so much history, but even more than that, we learned to honor people. My daughter would call him up and see what she could pray about or how he was doing, and just learning honor for those who sacrificed for us was something that you cannot learn another way. You can't learn that just from a history book. Sometimes we think you shouldn't let your kids talk during school, but you need to encourage your kids to be thinkers, not regurgitators. I would read them a history book, we'd stop and we'd talk about it. I remember one day all we did is history because we were so into it. We were reading about the survivors of the Bataan Death March when they were prisoners, the war camp at, I can't remember it and the name of it, the war camp. But anyway, we read about that all day. We were so into it. When I had 10 kids, I'd let them read it all on their own level. But when I had only a few, like some had graduated, we'd do it together. So, you know, don't feel bad about that, too. You can group kids together. Just because history says this is for 7th grade, you don't have to do it with just 7th graders. You can do it with 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then do grade 8 next year, you know, with your other kids. 13, sports builds cooperation and character. Instead, let me tell you, service builds cooperation and character. Hi, Mose. This is Mosby. He's my doggie. Train your kids to seek out the needs of others and expend energy and effort to meet those needs. I've seen those little signs, Mom's Taxi, with extracurricular activities. You're running your kids around. When you do that, it's kind of being all about you. We're doing this for you. We're doing this for you. We need to teach our kids to be about others. Model that. Take them by the hand. Walk them through real life. Not just playing games with other kids all the time. And I'm not saying never do sports with your kids. We had so many kids, they kind of had their own basketball team. We didn't do a lot of extracurricular sports, but kids would organize, invite other families over and play games or whatever. And I'm not saying never do it. I'm just saying evaluate. Think about it. Don't be tempted just to stumble into it because that's what everybody else is doing. Think, is this what's really best for my family? Is this a best time investment of their time? Or is there something more that we should be doing? Should we be investing in others more than we should be investing in this sport? I have seen sports just ruin a family schedule, disrupting quality family times, disrupting having supper together because people are running, 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 running to be on this sport. Sometimes it's even a financial burden. So again, I'm not saying any sport is wrong. I'm just saying open your mind and evaluate. Evaluate monthly. Is this what I should be doing? Number 14, kids need to be electronically savvy. Beware. It's good when it's used as a tool to serve a greater need, but it's habit forming and it's a great time waster. I've seen so many people with shallow relationships because everyone's on their electronic device. They've got their heads in their phones instead of talking to each other when they're out to eat. Limit the time that your kids spend on devices. Limit it, limit it, limit it. It's so much easier to watch something than it is to do something. It's so easy to slip into the habit of watching and not doing. And now that's even more so than when I was raising my kids. There weren't cell phones back then. The kids didn't have the temptation of the internet, my older kids. Just limit it. Please limit it. Limit it yourself. You need to spend time with your kids. You need to learn to know your kids. You need to enjoy being with your kids. And to do that, you need to put that phone aside. You need to put those devices aside and just be a family without them sometimes. But use them. I mean, it's great now. Like, I remember when we would leave all our kids with the oldest child, and he was the babysitter, and we'd go off to dinner. You'd worry. Sometimes you'd have to use a payphone to call and make sure they were doing all right. That's a great use of a cell phone. You've got that padded security that they can call you if something's wrong. So, nothing is wrong. It's just how you use it. So just make sure that you don't overuse it and damage your time together, damage your relationships. If you're spending all your time on your phone, what are your kids going to do when you're old? Are they going to be spending time on their phone and not paying attention to you? Another misconception, teenage rebellion is normal. It's not. Encourage your kids to question your values. Communication needs to be prime. Some of my best talks with my kids was after 11 o'clock at night, after the littles went to bed, and I knew they had something on their mind, and we'd sit up and we'd talk about it and discuss it. Don't be threatened when your kids question your standards. Help them realize how you came to those standards. You didn't just start out with those standards, you developed them. Talk it over, discuss it, and don't be threatened if your kids develop a little different standard than what you have. But help them talk through it and think about it. 16, you think, I have to know this before I can teach it to my kids. I'll tell you, I have learned so much in the process of teaching my own kids. I learned so much more teaching my own kids than I did as a student in school. Also, it's great for your kids to watch you learning a new concept. It's powerful learning. When they see mom struggling to learn how to do this math problem or to understand this concept, it's teaching them how to be a learner. So don't be discouraged. Don't think you have to know everything. You don't. See your job instead as providing them with tools and supplies that they need to learn, sometimes learning with them, but your kids should go to greater heights than you ever will. My kids have done that. My oldest is a lawyer. He knows so much more than I do. All my kids know so much more than I do about different areas, and that's the way it should be. Your homeschool is a springboard for your kids to jump to heights that you never dreamed of. Your kids can accomplish so much more than you can. They can know volumes more than you can, and that's how it's supposed to be. Your arrows reach far beyond your reach, and that's what you're doing. You're training up arrows, and then you're shooting them out, and you're sending them to accomplish things that you never could yourself. Your job is the director, the encourager, the cheerleader. The world is not going to cheer them along, but you can. Okay, I think the last one, we think our kids have to go to college. They have to go to college. It's just what is done, but they don't have to go to college. Most of my kids did not go to college. A lot of them started their own businesses. They started out life saving money instead of going into debt. If your child has a goal in mind and they need college, great, then college is what's good for them. But if your child's just going to college because that's what everybody does and they don't really know what they need, what they want to do, don't send them to college. Let them figure out what they want to do. They might want to go to a trade school. Trade schools are becoming a lot more popular now. People can make great money doing jobs in the trades. One of my grandsons is going into HVAC. He's learning it. He's apprenticing under a friend. Just again, we follow the same paths. We see everybody else doing this and we assume that's what my kids need to do. Don't assume that. See who your kids are. Don't assume they have to go to college. Colleges, they say that so many kids who grow up with Christian values are losing those values when they're in college. If you choose to send your children to college, you need to double down and teach them to have a biblical worldview and teach them boldness to stand up for truth and for righteousness. Don't just send them off to be a pawn of the system, because they're going to come out learning the ways of Caesar, and you're not going to be pleased with the end results. Give them a course. Give them a whole life of biblical worldview. Teach them the Word. Teach them to regard the Word as the only standard to their life. Biblical foundation has to be a prerequisite to sending your kids to college. And then also, if they decide to go to college, let them help earn their way there. They're going to learn a lot better if they have saved their money to earn their way to college instead of just having it all paid for. We couldn't do that. And, kids learn a lot better if they're investing themselves in that. Okay, just in closing, you don't have to be a super brain. You don't have to know everything to teach it to your kids. What you do have to do is teach your kids to read, to write, to communicate, and how to learn. Then anything they need to know through life, they'll be able to learn on their own or find help for learning it. Your job is to encourage their God-given love to learn and instill confidence in them by helping them believe that God has a wonderful plan for their life that He's unraveling day by day. Our job is not to be a mastermind, but to be a shoulder. We need to come alongside our kids, let them lean on us for rest and refreshment. Sometimes we need to give them a little nudge or a push and send them off to accomplish those great and mighty things God has in store for them. Homeschooling is not about the accumulation of data or the learning of academics. It is about building people of character who are prepared to enter the world and to accomplish the job that God has for them to accomplish. So I hope that this has encouraged you. I hope that it's encouraged you to think outside the box. We have the distinct privilege of not having to do things like the world does it. So think, evaluate, and ask your kids for their input. And develop a homeschool experience that's unique for your child, that's going to prepare them to be the person God has for them to be. If you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to contact me. And thanks so much for joining us today. See you next week. Bye-bye.